After the successful voyage of the Mayflower to Plymouth in 1620, more ships made trips and brought more people to America. Families began moving out of Plymouth and forming their own communities: Boston, Duxbury, Rehoboth.
In those early days, Rehoboth had no schools and no reading books. Children were taught at home by their parents, if and when there was time. Rehoboth claims to be the birthplace of free public education in America. This is because in 1643, the town was the first in the new land to vote that each settler must pay money for a schoolmaster.
There are very few records of those first years. Probably the schoolmaster went from house to house teaching. His pay often included money and goods, like corn or lumber to build with. Education through the 1600s and most of the 1700s progressed very slowly. Rehoboth was just a simple farming community. Homes were scattered. Children were needed to help at home. Our people were struggling in a new land, trying to survive and raise their families.
First, there were conflicts with the Indian natives, which resulted in King Philip's War and the burning of some 40 houses in Rehoboth by the Indians. Later, differences with the mother country resulted in the Revolution. Life in Rehoboth was fairly uneventful. It continued to be a farming community. People were busy with their daily needs.
As the population increased and small communities grew, district or neighborhood schoolhouses were built. They were simply crude, unpainted buildings. One small room with a fireplace and few windows. The master's or mistress's desk, benches or desks for the children, no pictures, water brought from a neighbor's well.
Schools were usually taught by men. The master received low pay and usually boarded around in the community. School was kept for only a few months of the year.
Horn books were one of the first teaching tools. They were small boards or paddles with large and small letters pasted on. A thin sheet of cow's horn over the letters kept it clean. Soon battledores were used. They were of cardboard and folded into 3 parts. Both hornbooks and battledores contained religious material, alphabets, numerals, easy words to read, and woodcut illustrations. These were used to teach younger children. The Bible was used for reading material for older children.
The New England Primer was a reading book which came after the hornbooks and battledores. Next came the spelling book. Every school had spelling matches. As Rehoboth grew, it was divided into many districts. Each district built and maintained its own schoolhouse. When books became available, the children brought their own to school.
They wrote with quill pens made from feathers. The teacher cut the ends of the quill with a sharp knife. It was called a penknife. Ink was homemade from ink powder or swamp maple bark. Paper was hard to get, however, so most of the work was done on slates, which children brought from home. Slates were thin sheets of stone which could be washed. Slate pencils often squeaked. Children walked to school, sometimes up to 2 miles each way.
We walked to school all kinds of weather. Even in the rain, in the snow, and the wind would be so cold that we'd walk backwards sometimes, and we had to face the wind when we'd walk backwards to school.
stay at school in the winter.
Could you read it?
It was paved down as far as the graveyard on Anawan School.
Roads were of dirt, usually in good condition, but occasionally they would become rutted and muddy.
The first district schools were very small, built on the edge of the road with very little schoolyard other than a place for a boys' and girls' outhouse or a sanitary, and a place to store wood. The land was usually not good for anything else worthwhile.
Schools had iron wood-burning stoves. A long stovepipe suspended from the ceiling ran the length of the room, giving off more heat. In the beginning, parents supplied the wood. It was said that if a child forgot his stick of wood, he would have to sit farthest from the stove's warmth as a reminder to bring it on the next day.
Willing older boys helped the teacher get the fire started. He would also fetch a pail of water for drinking from a neighbor's house, since there was no water in the schools.
In going into the school, there was an entry right inside the front door, and that was used for hanging up the coats. But it was mostly used for the pail and dipper that had the water for the daily water supply.
Where did the water come from?
Well, there was no well at that school. Some of the schools I read in the history did have wells, but we did not at the village school. And two of the bigger boys would take pail and go about a quarter of a mile to a neighbor's house and try not to spill too much coming back, but there wouldn't be sometimes too much in the pail by the time they got back.
Drinks were taken from a long-handled dipper, carefully wiped clean before it was dipped into the pail, as everyone drank from the same dipper.
By 1840, there were 22 districts with school buildings in Rehoboth. 7 years later, these 22 schools were combined into 15. Gradually, the towns paid for school books and firewood, and education became a little more equal in Rehoboth. Most schools had grades 1 through 8 in their one room, or whatever grades had children that year.
Teachers really did start the day by ringing the school bell. Boys and girls still walked to school, and the ringing of the bell reminded them to hustle. Only in the severest weather did they get a ride from a sympathetic neighbor in a cart or buggy, and not always then.
We walked to school, and in looking over the school districts, there were originally about 22, I believe. Now, when I graduated, there were 15. And it looks as though they were situated so no one had to walk more than, let's say, a mile and a half, up to 2 miles.
Mm-hmm.
Some walked as much as 2 miles, I think.
And you did that even in the rain, I'm sure.
Well, sometimes you could get one of the family members to take you with an old horse and buggy or something. Or I'd take one of the farm wagons and load it a number of children to go to school and so forth. But usually you're on your own. They were too busy around the farm to take you to school, so you had to get there by yourself, walking and so forth.
School hours were from 9 to 4, with an hour at noon for lunch, which was brought in a tin pail or bucket, and then recess.
Educational was very informal. And you had to think of your own things to do. Some would bring marbles in, play marbles. Girls would play jump rope.
Right.
And we all played tag up in the woods.
The school year was extended to 2 terms of 3 months each. Summer term, usually taught by a woman, began the first Monday in May. Winter term, taught by a man, began the first Monday in December. Because there was no work to be done on the farm, the winter term was popular with the boys.
By 1876, 3 terms per year were required. The first term of 8 weeks began in April. The second 8 weeks began in September, and the third term of 12 weeks began in December. Attendance at school depended entirely on the parents, whether or not they wished to send their children.
Subjects taught were reading, writing, and arithmetic. Much time was spent practicing, much time reciting. The older children would often help the younger. In 1882, districts were abolished and the one-room schoolhouses were given names. Most of the schoolhouses are still standing today, though much changed. Most of them have been made into private homes. The following pictures were taken from the side of the school, which originally had the entrance door.
District 1, Harris School, at the corner of Providence and Reed Streets, now a private home. District 2, Blanding School, at the corner of Broad and Wilmoth Bridge Road, is now Holy Ghost Hall. District 3, Willis School, Pine Street, now a home. District 4, Perry School, on Tremont Street, near Agricultural Avenue. District 5, Bliss School, on Homestead Avenue, east of Perryville Road, now unused. One very unique detail in this school was the elliptical or curved ceiling. It can still be seen today along with a hole high on the wall where the stovepipe fitted. District 6, Anawan School, on Anawan Street, also the former fire station, and now the Senior Citizens Building. District 7, the Village School, also called the Little Red School on the corner of Summer and School Streets, now a private home.
Yes. I went to the Little Red Schoolhouse, called the Village School. It was District 7 of the 15 school districts at that time. It was located at the corner of Summer and School Streets where the Abrams family now lives.
Right.
If you're speaking about skating, we dammed the brook in back of the school because we had very little playground facilities there. And that would freeze at the side of the school during the winter. And we'd make use of it for skating at lunchtime and recess. And we'd save time by clamping our skates on in the school room. Plus there were no, what we call shoe skates today. The skates had to be clamped onto the person's shoes.
They were iron, weren't they?
They were iron.
Did you turn it with a key?
Well, there were both kinds. There was one kind where you could turn it with a key. I had those. But there was also the ones that had a clamp that would just clamp it on your heel and sole. So we put them on in the school and clump out to the pond.
The teacher didn't mind your clumping?
Well, the teacher didn't. Well, I was thinking about others. We didn't have very many recreational facilities there. There was no room there. You can see today there's no room on that corner for playground or anything. But we used to go across the road, up the hill, and run around playing tag in the paths that were made in the woods up there.
District 8, Palmer's River School on Mason Street, now a home.
There were 3 Palmer River, there were 3 Palmer River schools. This one on 44 is the 3rd. There were 2 down on Mason Street. And the teacher's desk in the Hornbine School was taken from the 1st Palmer River School. There was somebody down there by the name of Palmer.
In 1891, the school flew the first American flag in Rehoboth. Money for the flag was contributed by friends, pupils, teachers, and parents. District 9, Horton School on Pleasant Street, also a private home. At one time it was used as a small church or chapel. District 10, Hornbine School on Hornbine Street, opposite Baker Street. Now it is a museum run by volunteers, open to the public in the warm months. The land was originally purchased in 1861 for $12. In the 1890s, the town bought more land for $50. In 1928, 49 students attended Hornbine School in grades 1 through 8. When it closed in 1937, there were only 14 students. District 11, Oak Swamp School near Brook Street on Molden Street, which is now gone. District 12, Long Hill School on County Street. It was sold for $100 in 1931 and is now a private home. District 13, Wheeler School on Fairview Avenue near Dighton. It was formerly the home of Mrs. Fernandez. District 14, Peck School on Anawan Street north of Fairview Avenue. Also now a private home. In the 1890s, the school was temporarily closed and classes were held around the big dining room table of the teacher, perhaps to save fuel.
District 15, Stevens School, on Tremont Street, east of North Rehoboth Methodist Church, also a private home.
Stevens School was attended by Mrs. Regala's father. He recalls getting the water from the neighbor's well and going to the school early to start the fire. He also remembers when the teacher would live with different families in the district for a month at a time. When the teacher stayed at his house, he had to move out of his room.
The last one-room school was Nichols School, across from the cannon. It never was a district school. It was at one time also used as a town hall.
Presently, it is used as the American Legion Hall. Dorothy L. Beckwith, for whom the Beckwith School is named, taught there briefly.
Town soon furnished all school supplies to the pupils. New schools gradually replaced old. Windows were on opposite sides, and some schools had windows on 3 sides with blackboards between them. Walls were plastered, and in many cases whitewashed. There were no shades for the windows.
In the fall of 1923, the Harris, Palmer River, Horton, and Oak Swamp schools closed. All pupils went to the new Pleasant Street School, the first consolidated school in Rehoboth. It was a 4-room wooden building for 8 grades, with 2 grades to a room. The first school bus was bought this same year.
Anawan, Landing, Nichols, the Village, and Wheeler schools closed when the new Anawan School opened in 1930. It was the first brick school. It had 4 rooms, 4th through 8th grades. Dorothy L. Beckwith, for whom the Beckwith School is named, was its principal. In 1940, the Perry and Stevens schools were closed when the North Rehoboth School was opened. The Hornbine School had closed too in 1937. It was the last 1-room, 8-grade school to close. Now, all the 1-room schools in Rehoboth were closed.
In 1952, the Palmer River School was built with 10 rooms. 10 more were added in 1960, the same year DR opened. In 1969, the Dorothy L. Beckwith Middle School opened.
An addition and renovations were made to it in 1997. The Pleasant Street School and the North Rehoboth School were both closed in the 1980s. In the 1990s, renovations and additions were made to the Dighton Rehoboth High School. In 1680, Rehoboth education cost $100. In 1998, over 300 years later, it cost well over $10 million.
Since 1937, The Hornbine School, the last one-room schoolhouse in Rehoboth, has been used in a number of ways. It has been a summer residence, a storage area, and it has been vacant. The building was bought and restored by volunteers as a part of the town of Rehoboth's 325th anniversary. Today it is used as a museum in the warm months of the year. It comes alive in the spring as each third grade class from Palmer River School dresses as children used to and relives the day in a one-room schoolhouse.
Remember the stories in your reading books about Mercy Otis Warren and Maria Mitchell, who had no school to go to and had to teach themselves? Well, you are lucky. You will soon visit the Hornbine School, a one-room schoolhouse of the past. But your real good fortune is in attending the Palmer River School in the present.